Right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I think we've still got some to join, but in the interest of time, it's 1 minute after 6 o'clock. We'll make a start. Thank you very much for joining the webinar this evening. We will spend the next hour hearing from Ian and Sam. We've got a number of questions lined up, but please, members on the call, ask any question you want pertaining to planning to Ian or Sam. If you hover over the screen, the bottom panel will come up, and either click on the chat and type your question into the chat, or if you prefer, click on the raise hand icon, and I'll bring, or Kate, who's helping with the hosting this evening, will unmute you and we'll bring you into the conversation to ask your question. So whichever is your preference, either post a question to Ian and Sam, or put your hand up and we'll bring you into the call. The call will be recorded. A number of our members who are keen to make it this evening but weren't able to, they've asked if it will be recorded, so we will be recording the call to make it available. My name's Gary Ford. I'm the policy advisor at BFREPA and I'll be the host this evening. I'm really pleased that Ian and Sam are able to join us for this very hot topic. It's always a hot topic, planning permission, particularly for those who are involved or thinking about submitting a planning application. Ian, in terms of introductions, Ian first got involved in poultry applications in 2006 when he began trading as Ian Pick Associates, primarily submitting applications on behalf of Bowler Eggs. And Sam Harrison, again, who many of you will know, worked for Ian for 11 years before becoming a partner in Harrison Pick Limited in April last year. The two of them have been trading as Harrison Pick Limited since then. Combined, they have an impressive 40 years of experience in the poultry planning sector. So that's a lot of experience there, and a lot of history. They, based on our planning applications, which we share with members every Friday, they estimate that they get involved in approximately 60% of free range planning applications in the egg sector. So that's another impressive statistic. So welcome, Ian and Sam. I'll ask the first question, if I may, as chairman's privilege, but please, members on the call, as I say, either put your hand up on the icon or post your question in the chat. So the first question for you, Ian, just to get us up and running, there'll be many members on the call this evening who are thinking about putting a planning application in for a new shed. What are the key aspects that need to be considered before a planning application is submitted to the local planning authority, please?
Okay, so it's over the 20 years I've been doing this, it's got more and more complicated. The issues have got greater over that time period. So now the big issues are ammonia impacts, what you do with the manure. There's the general planning requirements, which are the highways, visual impact, distance from neighbours, residential amenity. But the first thing I do is we look on ecological mapping just to see where the closest protected sites are. So triple SIs, special areas of conservation, special protection areas, Ramsars. We then run the general location through the ammonia screening tool just to see whether we've got a prayer of compliance with Natural England's very, very low air quality thresholds, which have come down 2,000% in the last 4 years. So air quality issues were only invented really in the planning system in 2007. And at that point, we had thresholds of 20. The units don't really matter, but we were working to a threshold of 20 in 2007. In 2018, Natural England decided 20 was a bit high, so they changed it to 4. And then in 2022, they thought 4 was a bit high, so they changed it to 1. So your distance from any triple SI is the absolute key to it, because we struggle to achieve the ammonia threat, just the Natural England ammonia threshold. If there's a triple SI within, for a 32,000 bird unit, you need sort of 2.5 to 3 kilometers separation to pass the test. So, yeah. So number one hot topic is ammonia and whether we've got a prayer of compliance. And I would say there's, out of the schemes we look at, there's 9 out of 10 probably failing at the first hurdle because they've just not got a prayer of compliance with Natural England's ammonia rules.
So, in other words, before you do anything, as you say, as you advocate, do that screening to establish how close you are to the nearest triple SI site. And in my experience, these triple SI sites aren't necessarily the ancient woodlands. They can be a relatively small area of grassland that's got some particular wildflowers in, and that could be designated a triple SI site. Am I right in thinking that, Ian?
Yeah, so triple SIs, you need to check what they are. So if you go onto the Land app or onto Magic, the government's Magic website, it will show you where the triple SIs are, but it won't show you what they are. So then you've got to look on Natural England's website or the Air Pollution Information System, and that tells you what they're protected for. Because some triple SIs are geological, some of them are not sensitive to ammonia, but the vast majority are. So you could be next to a triple SI and it's not a problem if it's a geological rock formation. But they can be woodlands, they can be mosses, they can be marshes, they can be moorland, they can be just a grass field. There's a whole host of different habitats come into it.
Okay. You mentioned for a typical 32K unit, you wouldn't want to be any closer than 2.5 to 3 kilometers if the ambition was 16,000, for argument's sake. Does that double that distance, or does it not quite work like that?
The modeling tools are pretty linear, so potentially a lesser distance for a 16,000, or if it's a 64,000, double the distance. Yeah. So, but it's also not an exact science, because so we, having been through this process thousands of times, you don't want to go and spend tens of thousands of the client's money and get a refusal at the first hurdle being ammonia. But we do see on the BFREPA list applications go in from local agents next to triple SIs or ranging in triple SIs, and nobody seems to notice. And so the odd one does get through.
So don't be put off, but certainly that would be the first thing that you would do, is that screening exercise.
That's the first thing we have to do, because it just triggers refusal with a Natural England objection.
Okay. Anything else after that, or obviously members would work with yourselves or other planning agents with the next steps, but anything else that they need to be doing, or very much that's the first priority, and then take it from there?
Our first priority, just in terms of, is this site got any potential or not, is we just check the ammonia. Then we've got to look at the normal planning issues. So your normal planning issues are: have you got safe access to the highway? Is it far enough from neighbours? So depending on the scale of it, you need separation distance from neighbouring residents. So if you're doing 64,000, you probably need 400, 500 meters from a neighbor. 32,000 will get away with a bit less. Highways, visual impact, don't really want them on top of a hill. If we can conceal them or group them with some farm buildings, then it's got a better chance of getting through.
Okay, thank you. you mentioned distance from neighbours. As we all know, there seems to be an awful lot of houses going up on the edge of villages where, I don't know, 10 years ago we wouldn't countenance it ever build on that land, but they are now. Is that going to count against applicants, even though they're in those examples they're newly built, new developments? Does that make any difference? Because increasingly villages and small towns are encroaching on farms and farmland, aren't they? So is that I suppose it is a factor because it's a dwelling. But any comment on that, please, Ian?
So if a settlement expands towards you, then it causes problems with your amenity impacts are still assessed. So as far as I can see, if I applied to build a poultry unit next to a housing estate, it would get refused. But we have clients coming to us saying that they've applied to build a housing estate next to their poultry unit and asking for assistance in objecting, and it does happen. And I think there was a case in Weston-super-Mare where the village expanded towards the poultry unit, and everybody moved into the new houses and complained about the poultry unit, and ultimately the poultry unit's permit got revoked because there was an amenity impact, even though the council allowed it to happen.
I have a I have a case right now where an existing customer of mine, a broiler farmer, he actually is right opposite what's now being a permitted barn conversion under a Class Q. If that barn conversion was there prior to the site being there, we'd be asked to assess the scheme for odour, noise, dust, a myriad of other reports. Flip it round. The council never considered odour in the slightest. It was just a form of, yeah, no problem, carry on.
So as I think you said, thanks for that, Sam. As you said, Ian, there's some inconsistency there. Sam, I'll come back to you in a second, but one more question for you, Ian, on this subject. If the proposed site is down a narrow country lane, quiet country lane, we might think on the face of it that's good because it's a quiet country lane, but I'm thinking that passing places could be an issue on that. How do you regard quite narrow country lanes from your experience?
So it depends on what the forward visibility is like, what the width of the verges is like. So if you've got a narrow country lane and the hedges are right up against the lane, and there's no opportunity to do any passing places, it becomes difficult. But it depends whether it's a through route as well. So if the route only goes to a couple of farms, it's easier. So it depends on the volume of traffic. But when you get onto narrower country lanes, the more common reaction from highways is give us some money to build some passing places. Or if they think the road is too inadequate, then it's an objection, and that would trigger a refusal. But so anyway, just back on the once we've gone through all the process of the highways. So if we think it's a goer, we would. If the site's perfect, we might just go straight into planning. If it depends on the local authority, but we'd probably go with a formal pre-application inquiry before submitting a full planning application, just to get the local authority on board.
I thought it was almost a requirement to do a pre-application before submitting a full application. It was almost expected by the local planning authority, but that doesn't sound as if it is the case.
It depends where you are. So if you're in Shropshire or in Herefordshire or in that part of the world, then pre-application every single time. But there are other. If you get into Lincolnshire and Yorkshire and places where there's some big open spaces and there's lacking in triple SIs and some good locations, then we would move forward on occasion without a pre-application inquiry.
Okay. What does a pre-app typically cost, please, Ian?
Pre-application inquiry, they're not central government fees, so they're set by individual local authorities. So they vary from places like County Durham agricultural pre-app fee, I think, is 30 quid. Whereas the same building in the East Riding of Yorkshire is 5,184. So in Lincolnshire, the Lincolnshire authorities are in the twos. So it varies across the country. It varies from nothing to top end 5,000-6,000 quid.
And do you get that money back? If you're successful, do they sort of say, well, you've already paid £2,500, we'll knock that off the fee, or am I being a bit naive in that regard?
No. Anything involving local authorities now is to do with extracting money off you. So you pay for your pre-application fee, that money's gone. The same as if you pay for your planning application fee, that money's gone. It doesn't come off it. It just gives you a little bit more confidence about writing the check for the big planning application fee.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Just one more question from me, and I'll move over to Sam, as I mentioned a moment ago. Just on this SSSI screening, is that game over, Ian? You mentioned 2.5 to 3K separation for a 32,000 unit. If you are closer than that, can you do bespoke modelling to demonstrate that it will not have a detrimental impact on that SSSI site?
So you can put forward a bespoke scheme. So you go with mitigation. So mitigation generally comes in the form of air scrubbers nowadays. So it's possible to reduce that separation distance, but you really need an air scrubbing system.
Okay. But definitely it's a conversation to be had. It's not necessarily game over. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. We may come back to that, Ian. Moving on to you, Sam. Permitted development rights. Can you tell us what that refers to, please?
Yeah. So more commonly known as a 28-day notice. It's a form of development which is essentially automatically acceptable, subject to a few planning constraints. The main one being for livestock buildings. Obviously, in this instance, you're limited to 1,000 square meters. Non-livestock buildings, which probably isn't the focus of this topic, you're allowed up to 1,500 square meters. I think the first and most prominent difference and the benefit of a 28-day notice, whilst you are limited to 1,000 square meters, which we're seeing roughly about 8,000 birds, 10,000 birds, depending on what system you're putting in. The main difference is the cost. To apply for a theoretical 1,000 square meter livestock building, perhaps an organic free range unit or something of the sort, the costs would be around 10 grand, maybe, including reports, maybe 15 grand. The cost of applying for the same thing on a 28-day notice, if you happen to fall within all the relevant planning constraints and you basically tick all the boxes, would be around £1,000. The planning fee being around 300 quid. So there's a massive cost saving, but it's a useful tool if you're out of options. The other kind of important aspect to take into consideration is the lack of assessment by comparison to everything you've just discussed with Ian. So when you're submitting an application, as Ian's pointed out, you've got odour assessments, noise assessments, ammonia assessments, ecology, BNG, which no doubt we'll come on to, muck spreading, dirty water, range management, landscape impact, highways, so on and so forth. The list is endless. When you're actually looking at this, none of the above comes into play whatsoever. It's a very straightforward process where the council are only permitted to really discuss the siting, the design, and the appearance of the unit. So immediately, your planning constraints list is far reduced. Your cost is far reduced, but you are limited to 1,000 square meters.
So for those members that are looking for a modest sized unit, 8 to maybe 12,000 birds, it's attractive, isn't it?
It is, and I think the other, it gets your foot in the door potentially. If you have a site that might be limited, might have a few planning constraints, you might have an ammonia problem. For the best part, local ecologists, local authorities don't tend to ask for any form of assessment of that nature. Whereas, if you're going for a full application, it's for the best part, it's an automatic requirement. The other thing to mention is it can be a useful tool to go from a 16,000 flat deck or something of the sort to a 32,000 multi-tier by way of an extension. You can apply for permitted development under an extension. So if you can go from say a 16 flat deck, you might get to a 30,000 multi-tier, 28,000 multi-tier, something of the sort, and it might only cost you £1,000. Whereas knocking your 16,000 flat deck and rebuilding yours a 32 multi-tier could cost you 30, 40 grand.
Mhm, mhm. And the local, thank you, Sam. And the local planning authority have got 28 days to respond, either yes, no, or seeking some additional information about the
Yeah,
application.
so what you're not really applying for planning permission. You are serving notice on the local authority of your intention to build something which you consider to be permitted development. So it's from an agricultural holding, you are entitled to 1,000 square meters every 2 years. Again, from a livestock perspective, it's the equivalent of me as a homeowner being able to put a garden shed in my garden without formal planning permission, subject to it not being above 2 meters in height and encroaching on the neighbours and overshadowing and all the rest of it. It's similar format, just on a larger scale for farmers. But
Okay.
yeah, they have 28 days to respond, and the beauty of it being, if they don't respond within 28 days, which you'd be amazed how many times it happens, it's approved by default.
Oh, that's interesting to know. So in a way, your fingers crossed, you're hoping they won't respond, but yeah,
You're hoping for a bit of public sector incompetence, but it
wow.
never comes when you want it.
No. And I don't know if you mentioned it, forgive me if you did, Sam, but as part of the criteria, you have to be at least 400 meters away from a dwelling.
You do, yeah, or a protected site. So a protected receptor. It could be an office. It could be a caravanserai. Yeah,
Yeah.
a few others. Workplace. People. A place is occupied on the regular by humans as a general rule of thumb. But
Okay.
there's few. The 400 meter rule is the main one. 25 meters from a road is another one. You can't encroach within 25 meters of a classified road. You can't be within 3 kilometers of an airfield or an aerodrome or an airport, which is actually it can trip you up. Can that one? There's a lot of private airfields here, there, and everywhere, which essentially a 3 kilometer radius from any of those prohibits you from doing anything, and that's the same for grain stores, straw sheds, anything.
Okay.
It's an outdated, silly rule, is
Uh,
that one, but it exists.
yeah, even the 400-meter rule, it's surprising how big an area
Mm.
that can, if you draw a line on a map, a Google Maps or something, for example, and use a measuring tool, it's surprising how 400 meters stretches.
Yeah, it is, and the other thing to mention is so often we do get responses on the smaller schemes, which I mean we don't do a lot of 28-day notices for free range units, I must admit, but when we do, they're often because of that rule stuck out in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere with
Uh,
no real mechanism to
but
get to the shed, which can sometimes trip you up, but there are of course other mechanisms to then apply for tracks and hard standings and feed silos and entrances and such after the fact. So,
okay, well, in some respects, that's an upside because putting a free range shed, maybe with pop holes down both sides of the shed in the middle of a field, is not a bad location. Um, Thank you for that, Sam. Just on that, and please, members on the call, if you've got anything specific on 28-day notice, or Ian's first response to my question, please put, or indeed any question, please put your hand up or post it in the chat. Jonathan's asked a question about can you put a concrete base down on a 28-day notice? Ian, you've said yes. I only repeat that because I'm not too sure if other members on the call have got visibility of that chat. Just on muck stores, Sam, we're keen to see muck stores going up as a partial solution to running muck belts twice a week, particularly during the winter months. Muck stores, can they go under a 28-day notice? I assume they can. No, and potentially they can be up to 1,500 meters square, from what you were saying a moment ago.
No, your muck falls under the same definition from a 28-day notice perspective as your livestock building. So
Ah,
you're restricted still to 1,000 square meters, but essentially it's exactly the same premise as everything I've just outlined. So yeah, 1,000 square meters, 400 meter rule.
yeah, okay. But that said, 1,000 square meters, 50 by 20, 50 meters by 20 meters, for example, it's 1,000 square meters. You know, it's a decent muck store, isn't it, to say the least?
I mean, muck stores they're most commonly put up under 28 day notice, I'd argue, especially if they're covering field heaps, covering existing bins, that kind of thing. They're a useful mechanism. We certainly do more muck stores under or as a 28 day notice than livestock units.
Okay, thank you. A question for either of you. What are the most common causes of planning rejection? So you've overcome the SSI site that you've mentioned a moment ago, Ian. What are you finding in your experience is the sort of where there's a rejection, refusal, should I say? What is there a theme there that our members can take on board when thinking about their own particular site, potential site?
So I would say going back in history, the most common reason for refusal for these things was landscape and visual impact. But it's become a little bit more tight in terms, now the issues are generally environmental rules. So there's issues in terms of what happens to the muck, runoff and ranging. They're generally more specific in terms of potential environmental impacts than the old days, where when I started, if you were going to refusal was either the highway authority objecting or landscape and visual impact landscape officer objecting. But it's not really that straightforward anymore. It's all complicated in terms of environmental issues.
Okay, thank you. A question about planning committees. I find it very frustrating, and certainly our members caught up in this situation find it extremely frustrating and costly and causing delays. Scenarios planning officer at the local planning authority recommends a approval only for the planning committee made up of elected district councillors to vote against the planning application. Any comment on that? Is that something you come across regularly? Any observations, and how do these, what determines whether a planning application is delegated authority to the planning officer, and what determines whether the planning committee can debate them at their regular planning meetings?
It's all individual, so it depends on the scheme of delegation for each individual local authority. So most local authorities have just got the ward councillor needs to call it in, and it generally needs to call it in within 21 days of registration for it to go to committee. But there are other authorities out there that any major application needs to go to committee, or if it's got more than 10 objections, it needs to go to committee. So it's absolutely specific to the scheme of delegation for each individual local authority. But most of them are moving away from committee decisions if they can. So I would say I've only been to committee twice this year, and so we're probably getting 99% delegated.
Yeah, that's interesting, Ian. And certainly, I went to a meeting hosted by Daniel Ziegler, the minister, recently, and the Department of Local Government were talking about increasing the number of decisions delegated to the planning officer. So that's if that is to come to pass, then that is encouraging. Good. Thank you both very much. We've got a question in the Q&A, which I think you're covering off, Sam. So thank you for that. Typical timelines on full planning applications. I know it's how long's a piece of string, but what's your sort of, from engaging with yourselves to hopefully getting approval, in your experience, how long does that take?
So, if you want to take that off, I'll just respond into the question and answer.
So the statutory timeframes are, if we're talking about a 32, then the statutory timeframe's 13 weeks from submission, as long as the local authority do things within a statutory timeframe, which is anybody's guess at the moment. But with the system as it is now and the validation requirements, we probably need 8 weeks lead time to put one in, because now we have to get a drainage report, sustainable drainage report done. We have to get the ammonia modelling done. We have got to get the ecology and biodiversity net gain done. So I would say your fastest timescale is probably about 21 weeks, as long as everything drops into place as it should. But that's without going through the pre-application process.
Okay. And typical cost, Ian, both in terms of your fees, if you don't mind me asking, and local authority, what are we looking at, typical cost? So, again, I know how long's a piece of string, but...
Yeah, so local authority fees are exactly the same anywhere in England. They're slightly cheaper in Scotland. But anywhere in England, the local authority fees are identical, because it's a government set fee scale. So a 32,000 bird unit on the current fee scale has a fee of about 22,000, whereas so that's actually nearly doubled in 2 years. The Conservatives had a go in December 23 and put 35% on it, and then Labour had another go this year. So we've ended up with quite a sizable chunk of increase. So it's gone up about 10,000 in 2 years as the fee for a 32. And then professional fees, our fees more or less the same for wherever it is. It's what else you've got to provide that kicks in. So the minimum you'll get away with would be drainage, ecology, biodiversity net gain, and ammonia. But then if you've got houses close by, or there's other reports that could be required, or if there's listed buildings to contend with, we need a heritage statement. So it varies, but the minimum cost is probably, in professional fees, is probably about 8,000, ranging up to 32,000, which is one that's just been approved recently, where the council wanted everything plus the kitchen sink in terms of technical reports. So it's it's the postcode lottery, and some local authorities are far easier than others, and there's some local authorities that ask for very little, especially if you cross the border into Scotland.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Ian. I've just scribbled those numbers down, and ballpark for a 32,000 unit, you're looking at fees between 30 and 50,000 or 54,000. So that's ballpark where you need to be budgeting for.
If you're in Scotland, knock the fee for a 32 in Scotland's about 15, so it's £7,000 cheaper on the council fee, and there's no biodiversity net gain requirement, and there's the ammonia is generally not required. So Scotland has now become quite substantially cheaper than England.
Okay. All right. You mentioned BNG, biodiversity net gain. Do you want to just tell us what that's all about, Ian, or is that one for Sam? Who's best placed to answer that?
So go on, Ian.
And then Sam,
you're unleashing the beast here, man.
Yeah. Before you gather yourself in, before you answer that question, Sam, I noticed you've responded to Sarah with a yes. Perhaps when Ian finishes BNG, you can bring that to life a little bit more. But Ian, over to you to tell us more about biodiversity net gain, BNG, please.
So BNG, so biodiversity net gain, was introduced last year and it only relates to England. So it doesn't apply in Wales and it doesn't apply in Scotland. So, and it's based on a DEFRA metric. So what we need to do as part of the planning application is get the baseline condition of the site assessed by an ecologist. So the ecologist will look at where we're going to build the shed, the access roads, any kind of physical development that's going to, and if that is anything growing, grass, trees, bushes, weeds, and it's more than 25 square meters, it needs biodiversity net gain. So what the ecologists then do is put that into the metric, into the biodiversity net gain metric, and it gives you a score as to how many biodiversity units your development is going to destroy, in terms of depending on what the habitat on the site is. So, and then you need to offset within your, ideally within your development boundary, in terms of enhancing some habitat within the site boundary to offset, and you've got to end up with a score of 110% of what you started with. So it's got to be 10%, a minimum of 10% net gain. You can do it off-site. So the validation requirement for a planning application is to just present your baseline situation. And if your development was going to lose 2 units, you could just say, right, I'm going to do this off-site. But you would then need to go to the habitat bank and buy 2 units, and they're probably 30,000 each. So to offset off-site is an expensive process. When you're doing free range, if our existing baseline is arable and we are reverting that arable to the range, then it's fairly straightforward to achieve the 10% biodiversity net gain on site, because grassland with some tree planting scores higher than the existing arable. So the problems we're encountering is the gain being too big. So on the metric, if you're doing a 16,000 and your site's 20 acres or 8 hectares, the arable score is 2 to the hectare. So you've got 16 units, it's your site. If you change that to modified grassland of moderate quality, that becomes 4. So you end up with 100% net gain. And that's before you factor in any trees. And this is where it becomes complicated, that if your gain is what they call significant, the council, you get penalised. So there's a punishment and a fine for too much. So if your gain is 100%, then the council can say, that's a significant gain. We require a legal agreement and a monitoring fee to come and look at it every year for the next 30 years. So I've just had a request for a monitoring fee and a legal agreement on a scheme in Nottinghamshire today. So it's a project where we're taking out a load of old mobiles, but it's a woodland egg scheme. So the scheme's amongst a woodland. So this applicant has basically got fantastic biodiversity on his site because he planted trees on there 25 years ago around his mobiles. And now we're having to enhance this. But because of our site area and because of what's there, the council have come back and said, oh, our gain is substantial. We want a monitoring fee of £9,000 and we want a legal agreement, which we're going to charge you £2,000 for. So it's challenging. You get penalised for providing too much.
That seems totally in. I just don't know what the words are to describe that, Ian. It just seems nonsensical that you're actually benefiting the environment, yet you're being penalised for it. That's nonsensical in my language.
I've put that form of words in an article on LinkedIn today of how stupid it is.
Yeah.
You basically, there's a punishment provided for providing too much gain in the system, which is ridiculous.
Wow, that should be a selling point for getting planning permission for free range units, not a detriment. Thank you for that, Ian. Again, any members got any specific questions on BNG, please post a question. No, Sam, over to you. There's a couple of questions I'd just like to clarify with you that you've posted answers to in the chat. Firstly, the first one, and thank you for being busy on the chat, Sam, answering these questions. An existing livestock cattle shed converted to a free range poultry unit. Just tell us about that. That you've commented on that. Is there anything you put no
Yeah,
permission
so
required? So go on.
yeah, so in planning terms, the definition of agriculture doesn't differentiate between day-to-day agricultural activities and livestock. Livestock is simply agricultural, without you've got a restrictive condition from way back in the day, which they really don't exist on the older sheds. You could theoretically do whatever you want with that shed in terms of any livestock, be it chickens, pigs, cattle, goats, llamas, whatever you want. So converting an existing building into a chicken shed is not a problem. There are some slight caveats in terms of external appearance, ventilation, pop holes, that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, it would be addressable. You wouldn't typically apply for them, I would suggest, but if you were to do so, and if you had to, as a rule, it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, so when your answer 632, no permission required in that instance, it is you don't need planning permission. I just wanted to get that. That was
If you just want to put some chickens in a cattle shed, you wouldn't need permission, full stop.
okay. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Sam,
Just
again,
just bear in mind
on
on
in.
that external alterations. You could come putting some chickens in an existing shed's not a problem, but if you put 20 fans on the roof and gable fans in it and things, they could get you on external alterations.
And
It's it's,
and
it's, it's the
potential
kind of
feet.
it's the kind of
On.
thing you want to approach the council about first, really. It just in terms of buying kit and installing ventilation and such, it's a costly exercise if you don't get there. But yeah.
Okay, and of course feed bins as well, adding to that
Mhm.
appearance. Yeah. Okay, thank you both. Sam, talk to us about Sarah's question about local nature recovery strategy plans, and just keep maintaining that environmental theme. After that, I would like to talk about nutrient neutrality catchments, and what that means for those members that are caught up in those designated areas. So firstly, the question from Sarah about local nature recovery. You've replied yes. Can you just elaborate on that? What
Yeah.
are
So
they? What does it mean?
the reason I didn't type any more on that is it's a slightly complicated answer. But I made a note earlier whilst you pressed in for an answer on what are the biggest constraints to what are the most common reasons for refusal. Whilst I haven't had it as a reason for refusal directly, one of the biggest issues we're having is local county ecologists applying the wrong rules to air quality, triple SIs, special areas of conservation, and one of them being a local wildlife site and ancient woodland. So there is a conflation of two different rules occurring on a regular basis. Now, the difference is quite substantial. Without getting technical, the threshold for a local wildlife site or what's classified as a non-statutory site, local nature reserve, ancient woodland, this kind of stuff, is about 100 times higher than a statutory site such as a triple SI. Now, what we're getting is county ecologists, local ecologists objecting to applications on the basis of Sarah's scenario there, and that is a major issue. Although we are kind of pushing the ecologists in the right direction and pointing them towards the legislation that says they shouldn't be doing this, that we are still maintaining objections. I had one application approved in Durham last week, and we at one point we were asked to plant around 50,000 trees to offset some ammonia, which was considered to be over the limit being 100%, and we were at 4%. But the county ecologists considered the rule to be 1%, so we were 3% over the rules in her mind. In my mind, we were 96% under the thresholds. So that's we are up against that. So in answer to Sarah's question, it is becoming a problem, but it shouldn't really be as big a problem as it is. It depends where you are in the world.
Okay. Okay. Continue. You mentioned Durham. Just going on. Hopefully that addresses your question, Sarah. But please come back to us if it doesn't hit the nail on the head, so to speak. Durham, nutrient neutrality catchment. Is that one for you, Sam, or for Ian to explain what that's all about, please?
I think we'll probably both have a go at it, but I mean, so nutrient neutrality in its simplest form is a requirement for you to demonstrate as part of your planning application that you're not going to be adding any nutrients post development. So if you are applying for a free range unit, you are by default adding nutrients to that area, or if you're within the catchment and you are ranging in that area, chickens will be ranging and put manure on the range, and as a default position, you are in theory adding nutrients, and you fall foul of the nutrient neutrality legislation, which it usually follows that you get an objection and a refusal.
Hmm. And how much of the country is covered by these nutrient neutrality catchment areas?
Is this 71?
Yeah, 71 or 73 catchments. But
Mm.
like I'd say, I don't think any free range unit has actually beaten this. I don't think that one's been approved in a nutrient neutrality catchment since they were implemented, which was what, 3 years ago now. Um, I'd say it's theoretically possible, but you need an outlet for your manure, which is outside of the catchment. You'd need an outlet for your dirty water that's outside of the catchment, and you would need some kind of significant assessment of range in terms of ADAS can do a farm scoper exercise, which will demonstrate that if your existing field is arable, it will show that the potential for nutrient runoff from arable is greater than the potential nutrient runoff from chickens. So I would say it's theoretically possible to demonstrate nutrient neutrality, but nobody's managed it yet.
It's more of a problem for free range systems, be it pigs or chickens, whatever it might be. If you have a sealed system, so like a slatted pig unit or a broiler unit or a turkey unit, whatever it might be, it's relatively straightforward to just put forward a proposition to export your muck out of the catchment, and that's it. And your dirty water's sealed, your muck belts can be sealed, and so on. If you've got a free range system and you've got stock utilizing any form of range, you can't really manage that to a point of neutrality without, as Ian's just said, they accept a baseline that perhaps cattle or sheep is worse than what you're proposing, which is a fair argument, but trying to get the local authorities to accept that logic has proven impossible thus far.
So obtaining planning permission for a free range poultry unit in a nutrient neutrality area is, well, just summarizing really, is extremely difficult, if not nigh impossible.
Well, we advise them not to bother.
Not to
I
bother.
I probably get I would guess 5 calls a week from people within either the Eden or the Tees catchment. You're getting on for one a day, and as soon as I look at the map or somebody mentions they're in that part of the world, it's normally doom and gloom and end of.
Okay. Okay. But if you've got an existing unit and you want to refurbish it or expand it, is that different conversation? Is that a more amenable conversation?
So existing unit, so the same principles apply. So if you wanted to change a flat deck to a multi-tier and you were not extending your building, then planning permission not required, crack on and do it. Whereas if you want to extend your building and declare to the council that you are increasing your stock numbers, then you will cop for nutrient neutrality problems. So if your existing site's 32, if you're expanding, you'll have problems. If you don't if you just want to swap flat deck for multi-tier within an existing building, then there's no planning issue for that, without a condition on your original consent on the numbers.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ian. Quite a complex situation that is. And please come back to on the call or separately if there's any follow-up questions on that. I'd like to Sam, come back to a question that you've answered in the Q&A. I'm not, apologies, I'm not sure if these Q&A questions are visible to everyone on the call. So just in case they're not, can you just talk about scrubbers and the question that you've responded to, Sam? And after that, if I can just ask about NIMBYs, please. So, Sam, can you just expand upon the question is, if scrubbers are required to get under the ammonia level and all other boxes from a planning perspective are ticked, does that overcome, does that mean that you'll get planning granted? Sam, do you want to elaborate on that and
Yeah,
certainly on your answer?
typically it does. I mean, scrubbers are a mechanism to reduce your ammonia output, and that's generally speaking, it's a 90% abatement. We're told, or at least what we model. If you've got an ammonia deposition that's above the thresholds and you can reduce it by installing scrubbers and everything else is addressed, then in theory, yes. I think the question on the Q&A was relating to Wales specifically, which Wales has its own problems, which admittedly Ian's more on top of than I, but Wales is more to do with manure management and dirty water, and you've got some serious problems in Wales, whereas in England these problems don't exist.
Yeah, picking up the Welsh issue. So Wales haven't approved any poultry applications since February 22. Everything that's been submitted since then is still stuck in the system undetermined, but it's not really an ammonia issue. It's so Natural Resources Wales say there is a regulatory gap in Wales, that their manure management regulations do not cover phosphates. So this is off the back of the River Wye catchment issue, but it's the whole of Wales. And so they are waiting for the Welsh Assembly to write a new control of agricultural pollution set of regulations which governs muck spreading, that includes requirements for phosphates. And their position is they will not support any planning application for any poultry unit until such time as those regulations are in place. So there's quite a few in the system that are stuck in the system, and we've tried all sorts of ingenious solutions. So I've just put forward a MAMBI contract. So MAMBI is a new facility in Lincolnshire, which is a fertilizer factory. It's an AD plant with a fertilizer factory attached to it, where there's no digestate. They're recycling the water back to the front of the process, drying and prilling the resultant digestate into a bagged fertilizer for sale. So there's no, and they need 139,000 tons of poultry manure. So we've got a contract with our Welsh schemes to go into there. We've put that forward, that all of the manure is going on a sealed lorry into a fertilizer factory, and Natural Resources Wales have still objected. So
even if
the answer is,
sorry.
Go on, Ian. Sorry, go on, Sam.
I was going to say, even if you currently comply with Natural Resources Wales rules as they're published, they'll still object.
And when will this be cleared up then? I suspect that's how long's a piece of string, but when will clarity, certainty apply, Ian? Have you been given any comfort, any indication of when they will be?
I've only got two. I've two schemes that are stuck. They're both in Powys. They're both subject to call-in, but I've been told that I was told in April that they wanted a year's extension of time. And what you've got to bear in mind is one of these is a 2020 planning application, and the other one's a 2021 planning application. So they've been in for 4 and 5 years now. They want another year, and the talk is this new legislation will be out by Christmas this year, and then they will need to reassess these planning applications in accordance with the new legislation. But all these planning applications, all mine are, it's all to do with export anyway. They were export to AD or export into MAMBI anyway. So they're getting caught up in a muck spreading argument when nobody's proposing to spread any muck.
It doesn't seem logical. Okay, well, thank you for that answer regarding the scrubbers and particularly as it pertains in Wales. Um, Jonathan, if there's any, hopefully Sam's answered your questions on tracks under permitted development or 28-day notice, but if there's anything you want to come back on that, please do. Sam, you've answered Donald's question around if a building is lost due to a fire, is full planning required? You've said yes. Do you want to just add to that? But I would like to think that that should be straightforward in obtaining that planning permission, you'd have thought. Anything you wanted to add to that?
I'm just doing one now in Shropshire, so we'll see whether it's straightforward or not.
You'd certainly hope so. Lot like there should be some logic applied, but yeah, it's unfortunately it falls within the definition of development, so planning permission is automatically required. But whether or not they ask you for full air quality assessments and such is, I think, you're at the grace of the local authority.
Well, arguably, you depending on the age of the shed, you'd argue betterment, wouldn't you, for the environment? As
The
well as
problem is, from a planning standpoint, the shed's gone. It doesn't exist. So you haven't really got a baseline. So you would, in theory, if the local authority really wanted to be difficult, and they've got form at the minute, you would be starting from zero.
mm, mm. Okay, that doesn't seem quite fair or equitable, but
There's a trend here.
yeah, okay, okay.
You're
Well, I'm sorry.
looking for logic in the planning system, and it doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, sorry. The answer is couldn't be better, Donald. But hopefully, common sense will prevail. Ian, NIMBYs, you and I attended a very vocal planning application. It was for broilers a good one many years ago now, and I thought you were going to be hung from the nearest tree, and I certainly feared for my welfare at the same time. But we both survived and lived to tell the tale. That particular application had an awful lot of uh, why not just local opposition, as I just sort of alluded to, but also a campaign from people around the world, seemingly writing in, objecting to it. What weight do both local objectors and we've touched upon this slightly when you said about the ward councillor calling in an application to be determined by the planning committee. What impact do um, local people have in the area and those much further afield? Is there a threshold? Particularly those much further afield, are they taken seriously or are they seen for what they are? And that's a campaign against poultry applications. What's your comment on all of that, please, Ian?
So it's more of a problem that I'd put on the broiler side of things rather than free range. We don't seem to get massive amounts of campaigning against free range units, but yeah, when they get onto if they go to one of the animal rights groups and they put them on their website, you can end up with thousands and thousands and thousands of objections. But yeah, they're from all over the world. So I had one in Pembrokeshire that I think had 38,000 objections, but most of them were American, and they were all from vegan organisations. So ultimately it doesn't make a difference, or it shouldn't make a difference to the outcome, but it can sway elected members if it goes to committee. So if you go to committee and you've got 27,000 objections, it just makes the committees a little bit more nervous. But
you also have local news broadcasters picking up on it and running articles, and yeah, it's that kind of stuff, isn't it?
yeah, so we've just had, I have a 64,000 running in the East Riding at the moment, which has got no objections from locals at all. But not for the want of trying of the press. The BBC ran an article on it, the Yorkshire Post ran an article on it, and there was a lot of comments under the article, but nobody's actually objected to the planning application. But yeah, it's Swiss. You're more likely to get a refusal if you've got 50 locals than 10,000 vegans.
Okay, thank
I
you.
think it was a
And
bit. If I could
go
just
on.
add to that slightly, Gary, I think possibly, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, it was a bit more of a prominent problem because local authorities were failing to differentiate between a campaign and an objection. Whereas now, when you go to committee or when an officer writes a report, they tend to itemise objections versus campaigns and such, which it does help.
Mm.
Um, they are beginning to recognise that these are just orchestrated campaigns as opposed to local opposition.
Okay, that's encouraging at least.
Mm.
Parish council aren't, as far as I'm aware, statutory consultees, but clearly they do represent the local populace. And clearly on that basis, you'd much rather have their support than them be against you. How influential are the parish council?
Um, the some have the power to trigger committee. So, in this in the Shropshire scheme of delegation, the parish council objection means planning committee. So, it stops you being having a delegated decision.
Mm,
But yeah, it's down to politics. It depends what they say.
mm,
If their opposition is founded in some respect, then it will be given some weight. But we try with this all the screening we do and the pre-application of things, we don't really submit anything that doesn't tick the boxes. So
okay.
so if the parish council object, it's generally political rather than technical.
Okay. Yeah, no, yeah, thank you. That's yeah, I understand. Yeah, thanks very much, Ian. I understand where your point on that. Good. We've got a question from Sam, which you've answered. Ian, Sam's from Northern Ireland. You and your Sam Harrison, don't cover Northern Ireland, but what we will do is we've got a number of members in Northern Ireland, so we will put on a separate webinar for our Northern Irish members. So please don't feel that you're missing out. We are at 7 o'clock, 1 hour. We did say that we'd run this for an hour. I think we've covered, and help me out, Sam and Ian and Kate, if you're able to. I think we've covered, or you in particular have covered all the questions in the chat. Sam, have we missed anyone, or can I look to close the call?
I think there was just a question early doors about how many about 28-day notices and the 2 year rule or different holding numbers and that of a sort. There is an important um, ruling on the 28-day notice front where you can only do it once every 2 years without you actually move 90 meters away from the previous or the last built shed. So if you do a 28-day notice for a building in a field, for argument's sake, if you were to go 100 meters away, you could automatically do another one the day after. It's very unusual that it becomes of any relevance, but we have done it well. Of late, I've done it a few times, in honesty. So it is probably a relevant point and a good question.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for spotting that one, Sam. I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions. I seem to remember somebody was asking about clarification on the 28-day notice, but
I think that was the one.
that was the one, was it? Thank you. I can't see it now, and I think hopefully, yeah, but you've addressed it. Right. I think just on what's your experience? Just quick question from me. What's your experience of appeal members having to go to appeal that have been turned down at the local planning authority? Any comment on that? Any guidance? Any words of wisdom for members who find themselves in that difficult position that they've been refused, particularly if the local planning authority officer recommends approval and they're turned down by the committee? Any comments on going to appeal? What's the timelines? Any advice? What's the cost, etc.?
Go on, Ian. I'll let you
So
have a rant.
the timelines on appeal are anybody's guess because the planning inspectorate's in a very similar mess to local planning authorities in terms of budgets. So the time there's no set timeline for an appeal. There's supposed to be, I think, 26 weeks from when they register it, but they're generally taking quite a lot of weeks to register the appeal. But your costs of an appeal, there is no cost in terms of there's no fee to pay. So when you apply to the council, you have to pay a fee. But when you appeal, there's no fee to pay. It's just your professional fees. So it's all dependent on what reasons for refusal you've got and what technical reports you've got to do to address them.
I think it's probably fair to say as well, without being like too brazen, that the faith in the appeals system in the inspectorate is probably thinning a little bit. Like you mentioned committees, for example, like going back 5, 6, 7 years, if you got an application overturned at committee, so you went to committee with an officer's recommendation of approval, and the committee opted due to, let's say, public opposition and bowed to pressure, and they refused it on some technical ground, say odor impact or something like that, you would know with a relatively high degree of certainty that you're going to appeal and that you're going to win. You had faith that common sense would prevail, and you'd be put back on track. Now there's that much uncertainty in the system, and there's that much contradictory case law, and there's such a conflict of information within on the internet for the best part, that you can't really have too much faith in the appeal system. You've got to hope that it comes good, and it is essentially your last resource. But it isn't what it was.
Okay, I'm sorry to hear that, Sam, but just on that 26 weeks, Ian, is there any way that you can ask for a fast track for an appeal? Because time is money, isn't it? And is there any way that you can speed it up, or are you in the hands of the planning system?
Yeah, you said there's no, but you're dealing with a machine, so it's there's no way of fast tracking it. If you opted for a hearing or a public inquiry, it would generally become quicker, but your costs of your appeal would escalate quite substantially.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you for those final comments on appeal. It's now after 7:05. We will draw the call to a close. I hope our members on the call have found this useful. It doesn't stop there. If there's anything you want to follow up on, and I know, Catherine, your suggestion of another campaign, absolutely. If there's anything you want to follow up on, please come back to Keith or myself, or directly to Ian and Sam. If you didn't get to ask a question, or you'd like a little bit more information on the responses given, as I say, please do get in touch. Other than that, without any further ado, Ian, Sam, thank you very much for your time this evening, tapping into your significant experience. As we said, I think 40 years of combined experience. We need to use it to our advantage, to our members' advantage that are going into this situation, or thinking about it, or midway through it. So thank you for imparting your knowledge this evening. As I say, hopefully members found it useful, and thank you very much for joining the webinar. We will put it on our website at some point in the coming week or so. Thank you again, and I'll close the call.
Cheers.
Goodbye.